Good evening, everyone. We have the DJ here. So, just wanted to give you a couple of minutes background in terms of what we're trying to do here, and then we would have a welcome address by DJ, and then we will go forward with our session. So, as you would have seen, the topic for today's session is, how do you have this sort of a growth mindset in the current crisis situation? And many of you might be thinking that, Kartik is going crazy talking about growth. Here, people are even struggling to run their business. But I believe strongly that, it's all about, the way we pivot our business and the mindset we have. I was reading about Mr. Damani's story that how among all the failing other retail businesses, he's actually creating a growth story out of the current situation. There are apparel companies who have twisted their business model to manufacture masks and whatnot, and they're also creating a huge growth story. In my own business, we do education. People are pivoting to e-learning models, and they are able to tap the opportunity which the current situation has presented us with. So I believe rather than getting disheartened, we should, as a group, think about ways in terms of how we can actually think innovatively out of the box and use the right tools and sort of technologies available to actually think of how we can actually grow and come out of this mindset or a shell that all the situation is very dismal and we cannot do anything. So with this context, I would first welcome Rekha Sethi, who is the Director General AIMA. Most of you know her. She needs no introduction. She is the one who has taken AIMA to what we know today as, and she sits on the board of a lot of companies like Sun Pharma, and she needs no introduction. So I would request Rekha ji if you can spare 5 to 10 minutes just to sort of give us your views in terms of how do you see this current situation panning out? What can business owners, employees, different stakeholders in the ecosystem get this growth mindset and not be scared of the current situation? Over to you.
Thanks, Kartik, and thanks for pulling me in. You are the only one who manages to do that somehow, time after time. But I'm delighted to be here and meet the members of YLC, even though virtually. And I'm really happy to see so many LMAs also joining us today. So a very warm welcome to all the YLC members, to our local management associations who have joined us from all over, and all the speakers who would be speaking today. It's good to be here and to be talking to you. I have been asked to say a few words on the impact of COVID-19. Very honestly, these days, there isn't much else left to talk about except the virus, its impact, and how we are going to cope with it. It's probably coming out of your ears, but I guess there is no other topic to talk about, at least for the next few months. Apart from the very painful human cost, we will have a huge economic cost to pay going forward. Managing in times of COVID-19 is a daunting challenge. Without clarity about when the pandemic will pass, it is difficult to plan a return to normal.
Shut the fuck up.
Meanwhile, a stalled economy is causing great hardship and damage to both production and consumption. Indian economy, which very honestly was already on shaky grounds, our GDP had never been so low before the virus struck, is taking a battering, and it would require a great deal of magnitude, fortitude, and government help to restore business once the virus threat recedes. The key to economic recovery is rapid containment of the pandemic to a level that allows for progressive resumption of business. If Wuhan has to be taken as an example, then we are, I guess, looking at maybe 2 or perhaps 3 months of economic shutdown before the resumption of regular business. COVID-19 has actually spread faster and wider than any previous epidemic because of global connectedness in the 21st century. But it is this globalization which has also allowed the whole world collectively and to lower the death rate. I am a firm believer in this too shall pass. And pass, I think it will. However, frankly, it's anybody's guess as to when. Prime Minister Modi rightly said it's a historic time and will be talked about as pre-corona time and post-corona time. I think we are leaving BC far behind and it's now going to be PC that we are going to be talking about. Goldman Sachs has actually projected India's GDP to go down to 1.6%, pulling 40 crores into poverty. They have said that the world will degrow at minus 2% and the US is expected to degrow at minus 6%. So I guess 1.6% growth doesn't sound so bad then. But in the US, number of people on the dole has already gone up by 3,000%, and I think they're already looking at a 15% rate of unemployment. In India also, we are looking at job losses, smaller companies packing up, pay cuts, sectors like tourism, hotels and airlines facing a bleak future. The government of India has announced a package of 1.7 lakh crores, but frankly, a lot more needs to be done, especially for the MSMEs and also for the rest of the industry. If we don't take care of those who provide employment and let them go under, we would face unprecedented unemployment and poverty, which may even lead to social unrest. However, I'm hopeful both packages will come soon, sooner than later. Let's hope for the best. And companies are also beginning to gear up to prepare for life after the lockdown. What happens then? Because we cannot forever be in a state of lockdown going forward. From temperature checks to fumigation chambers to more automation and social distancing at work, life is going to change for all of us as we go forward. It has in fact changed for many of us already. Work from home has come up as a viable alternative. It is working so well that I'm told that in Chicago, some companies are actually even looking at giving up their expensive downtown offices and getting most of the staff to work from home, even after the dust settles down. Just before I end, I just want to say, in my opinion, it's not all gloom or doom. As we can see from the blue skies outside, the birds chirping and nature beginning to reclaim what was rightfully hers to begin with. I recall that we have spent crores of rupees trying to clean the Ganga and the Yamuna, which I'm told today flow clean. People have rediscovered families and rediscovered what it means to be truly alive. And lastly, I feel human beings are resilient. And perhaps at the same time next year, the time today will feel like a bad and distant dream. So on this positive note, I want to thank you all for once again inviting me to the YLC session and for hearing me out. So Kartik, this was my small bit on Corona. I think I can talk about it in my sleep also now. Over to you.
Thanks so much, Rekha ji, extremely kind of you. And I think you have actually lent a very positive tone to the whole conversation and set the stage right. And I think now we're going to go into our esteemed speakers. So we have 4 speakers today, and it's an all woman powered session today. So I'm truly excited. So in today's time, one of the major issues which is coming up is the whole issue around force majeure. So a lot of you would have heard about, companies enforcing force majeure clause in their contracts. People are suddenly starting to read up their contracts, which nobody used to read. Those boring clauses, suddenly they have become very pertinent in the conversation. People are clueless whether they can pay cut their employee salaries or not. Can they fire employees? Can they ask for certain government relief under so many schemes which are launched? There's a lot of chaos and confusion around these compliance and legal related issues as of today. And nobody better than Sushma Mathur we have today in our session, who's going to talk about this. She's a legal consultant and advisor with over 15 years of experience. She works with all the Fortune 500 companies. She's also associated with IIT Delhi to help their startup and technology cell for all the SME companies who want to get legal advice. So I would request Sushma to talk about all these legal and compliance related issues and what kind of schemes and reliefs have been offered by the government which we can make use of, and how do we better make sure that we use this situation of force majeure, and how do we interpret it? That's the most important part. We have got all these rulings and notifications available in as documents, but it's very hard to sometimes interpret that what it means for my business. So over to you, Sushma, if you can just talk about this for all of us. We're really happy to have you.
Thank you, Kartik, for the introduction, and Rekha ji for setting the tone for discussion. Good evening, all. Since the time is limited, so in the discussion, I would cover the major legal issues arising out of COVID-19, which are impacting our businesses. So the flow would be first to understand the meaning of force majeure, which I'm sure each one of you would have heard or read about. Then we will go on to understand the implications on commercial contracts like suppliers contract, vendors contract, and commercial leases. Effect of the same on employer-employee relationship, and a few relief measures announced by government, which may discuss at the end. Starting with force majeure, why it is important to understand this concept? Because this concept would apply in all the situations of the business. Force majeure means superior force, which obstructs the continuation or lawful existence of a contract between the parties. The inclusion of a force majeure clause in a contract allows a party to suspend or terminate its duties and obligations in case of an occurrence of an act which may be classified as force majeure. So I'm emphasizing that it has to be understood that force majeure allows the contract to be suspended. Because in case of doctrine of frustration, the law says that the contract has to be terminated altogether. Now we must know that the applicability and enforceability of the force majeure clause fluctuates substantially and depends on what all events are covered at the time of entering a contract. Hence, it is very, very important to draft and now to review the clauses at the clauses now when COVID-19 is impacting our business. Practically speaking, some of the FMC clauses, FMC means force majeure clauses, would include a definitive list of events. And what is the purpose? The purpose is it is an attempt to narrow down the applicability so that there is less scope of asking for excuse in performance. Other force majeure clauses attempt to broaden the applicability to any unexpected eventuality outside the party's control by including, as you would have noticed, an open-ended catch-all provision at the end of the force majeure clause. For example, it may read that force majeure shall also include all other acts beyond the party's reasonable control, which may be interpreted to include COVID-19 as well. But again, it depends on the language of the clause, which is there in the agreement. Situation is very easy when there is a specific FMC in the agreement, as the courts will give their decisions on that basis. But what will happen if there is an absence of FM clause? Is there any relief to the parties in such a situation? The answer is yes. In such cases, parties are not completely out of remedies, and Section 56 of the Indian Contract Act comes into play, also known as doctrine of frustration, which means that a contract becomes void when the performance of the contract becomes impossible or unlawful. Now the question arises, what is the difference between force majeure and doctrine of frustration? While doctrine of frustration envisages the impossibility of performance leading to avoidance of contract, it does not capture the concept of unforeseen contingencies which result in a temporary suspension of performance and resumption of contract. So in a situation, force majeure comes into play. To put it simply, unlike a force majeure clause where the non-performing party needs to elect or choose to invoke the clause either by means of a notice or otherwise, the frustration of contract operates automatically from the date of impossibility and puts the contract to an end. That is the major difference. So the key points for applicability of doctrine of frustrations are: if a contract has expressed or implied force majeure clause in your agreement, then those provisions will apply over doctrine of frustration. Application of doctrine of frustration must always be in narrow limit. Any rise in cost or expenses shall not frustrate a contract. For example, these days people are taking a plea that the cost of procuring the raw material has increased, so that's why the doctrine of frustration should apply. So the courts have taken a view: no, a mere rise in cost or expense shall not enable that party to apply the doctrine of frustration. Again, one of the fundamental, I would say, interpretation is that the force majeure clause shall not apply if an alternative mode of performance is available. This is extremely important. So now once we have understood concept broadly that what is the difference between force majeure and doctrine of frustration, let's see the applicability in practical scenarios. Recently, you would have heard OYO has suspended payment of monthly revenue to its hotel partners as it is finding impossible to discharge its obligation under the agreement due to COVID-19. OYO has invoked force majeure clause on account of outbreak of COVID-19 being an extraordinary circumstance which is beyond its control. But a number of hotel owners said that OYO cannot invoke force majeure as the clause was never included in the original agreement. So the question is whether OYO is legally correct in undertaking such actions or not. So again, it depends from contract to contract whether that force majeure clause was there in the agreement initially, or even if it was there, then what is the scope of interpretation and the applicability. We also heard recently that Reliance has sent notices to the owner of the premises which it had taken on rent, terminating the lease agreement. Reliance terminated the contract by invoking force majeure clause citing the lockdown. The point to be noted here is that the force majeure clause did not encapsulate such a situation. Further, Reliance was carrying on its operations on the rented premises through online internet sale of retail products and goods, and it had not encountered any genuine difficulties in performing the contract. This means that Reliance has explored alternative mode of performance, and in such a situation, the owner has raised contention that the contract holds and Reliance cannot deny its performance. It is contended that inability to earn revenue on account of closure of the commercial establishment for that temporary period cannot be stretched to be equated to the supervening impossibility to pay the lease rental. This business risk has to be borne by the lessees, which is Reliance, and they can neither wriggle out of their obligations to pay the lease rental nor resort to the current legal framework to get out of their said obligation. Well, for sure, this case will end up in court and we will get to know the outcome later. But this was an example of applicability of force majeure clause and how parties going to play with it. Similarly, parties have also invoked force majeure clauses in suppliers contract, vendors contracts, and other services contract. So the relevant question which arises is whether FMC may be able, so that force majeure clause, can we suspend the contract basis FMC or not? What if the party against whom force majeure clause is invoked, what it can do? What are the options available to it? Is any notice is required to invoke force majeure clause? Or is it better to have a broad or a narrow clause when you draft the FMC? How can the opposite party argue that COVID-19 is not an act of God? So it will be interesting to observe the court's take on each dispute and how it may pave the way for an improvement or restriction under the Indian laws, because we will see a lot of litigation after this, after a couple of quarters. And not to forget that each contract is different and the interpretation depends on the language used in the agreement. Moving on to the employer-employee relationship, as we have seen that COVID-19 has impacted this relationship. We have seen positive as well as negative trend in this segment. Today only I was reading that Walmart has hired more than 1 lakh new workers over the past 3 weeks to meet surging demand, and it has further announced that it would look to 1,50,000 positions in near future. However, at the same time, we also hear news as latest as of yesterday that hospitality giant OYO has asked thousands of employees to go on leave for a period of 3 months as the company plans to combat coronavirus. A couple of days ago, we heard OYO has laid off hundreds of employees in the US across divisions like sales, business development, and HR. Similarly, we also heard Indigo has announced that it will implement salary cut up to 25% across its workforce, following global airlines that have been forced to take such steps in COVID crisis. These steps have raised many questions. For example, whether company can take such actions arbitrarily, what are the provisions contained in the employment agreement or offer letter, whether these provisions will prevail, whether there are different provisions for workers who are defined under Industrial Dispute Act vis-a-vis employees not covered by that statute, whether employees can be forced to use accrued compensatory leave or vacations days during a health crisis. So it all depends on the legislation, it differs from country to country. What other policies, guidelines, your mutual contracts, employment contracts, various statutes which have been enforced. For example, in India, there is Industrial Dispute Acts, which takes care of the workers, which are governed by Industrial Dispute Act. And also, one of the important question, whether there are any remedies available to employees in such a case. So it all depends, and so many things have to be looked into before answering that question, because it depends from organization to organization, the size, the applicability of statutes, etc. All businesses, regardless of size, are facing serious challenges with the real threat of significant declines in revenue, insolvency, and job losses. COVID-19 emergency has directly impacted employment relationship, both from health perspective and general management of relationship. For example, salary obligations, effects of government's orders, etc. Employer and employees are actually struggling to understand their rights and responsibilities at this time. To make things so there have been, so from government side also, there have been various circulars, notifications issued, but these are more confusing. There have been some advisories from government suggesting that all public private employers should cooperate and should not terminate the services of their employees. However, the nature of these orders is not clear. So at some places they have used the word shall, which implies that these orders are mandatory in nature. However, if you go down the line, you see that they have used the word should. It is advisory. The employers may. So this has actually created a lot of confusion even amongst the lawyers fraternity. So the challenges faced by workplaces have become a new front in the battle over the coronavirus. Although the government is trying its best to extend measures to combat COVID-19 and has come out with many schemes, relief, extensions. For example, Supreme Court, NCLT, NCLT have extended limitation period in the proceedings. Ministry of Corporate Affairs has rolled out settlement scheme for companies and LLPs. Various provisions have been relaxed for conducting board meeting, shareholders meeting. Yesterday only there was a circular by MCA that now shareholders meetings can also be conducted via video conferencing. Existing foreign trade policy 1520, which was valid up to 31st March 20, is extended by 1 year. Various other changes are also made, extending the date of exemption by 1 year. As we all know, moratorium of 3 months of EMIs on all outstanding loans was announced. There is a deferment of interest on the working capital facilities as well. Relaxations has been provided from compliance with certain provisions of the SEBI as well. The due dates for various issue of notice, approval orders, reports, time limit for completion of proceeding by income tax authorities, everything has been extended in view of COVID-19 outbreak. So a lot has to be seen, experienced in times to come. Many game changers we will also come across. So let's hope for the best and prepare ourselves for the future. Thank you. Over to you, Kartik.
Thanks so much, Sushma. I know there was a lot to cover, but you have really sort of tried to give us glimpses of the employee side, supply contract side, rentals, force majeure, everything. And for everybody's benefit, we're also going to circulate a small document from Sushma, which is going to detail all these points and various schemes which have been approved by the government. So she will share that with us post this session. Are you guys able to hear me?
Oh, yes.
Yes. So Sushma is kind enough to share this document with us post the call for everybody's benefit. And if still certain questions remain, we're going to take those questions after the end of the entire session. Please keep putting in your questions in the chat section and we'll take them collectively afterwards. We move on to the next speaker. The next speaker is Malika Malik. She is an extremely sharp technology enthusiast. She's a data scientist from London School of Economics. She works in Microsoft as a cloud solution architect. And she's at the pulse of these things in terms of how technology is being used worldwide to conduct or to manage teams remotely. So she's in middle of the action in the UK, and she's going to talk about how technology is being used in large companies and what kind of tools and products we can use as business owners and SMEs to talk about to sort of manage our teams remotely, engage them, and work collaboratively. So over to you, Malika.
Firstly, good afternoon, everyone. It's afternoon in London. It's bright and shiny, and it's just hard to be sitting at home when it's so shiny in London, because we crave for this weather. We crave for the double-digit weather to come in so we can really go out and enjoy. But I think the need of hour is to stay at home, and is to stay safe and really stay at home for protecting everyone else, because I think the messaging around here is that is a third immunity, and for especially people who are old and vulnerable, I think it's really important to stay at home. So good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for inviting me. And what I really like about the whole tonality of conversation we are having here is, when you switch on the news, the conversations about COVID, and it's all very negative. And after a 1 hour conversation, I wouldn't lie, I would really sulk into depression, sitting at home away from family, because it is a pandemic which has led to a lot of uncertainty around us, right? We don't know if it's airborne or not. We don't know how it's going to spread. We don't know how to tackle this situation. And that's really led us to a very unprecedented situation which we don't have an answer to. But what I like about this conversation is how we're talking about, I think it's, yes. How we talking about, how do we tackle this? How do we come out of it? How do we discuss and really discuss different aspects of tackling COVID together? So before I begin to talk about using technology to bringing people together and, really setting the momentum of collaboration within teams and customers, I'm going to just have a quick introduction for myself. I'm Malika Malik. I'm a data and AI cloud solution architect at Microsoft. And I know this term might sound really heavy for most of us. I'll break it down to you. I think my key focus at my day job is to really help my customers leverage technology, leverage artificial intelligence and machine learning, and build an ecosystem for our customers at Microsoft to accelerate their digital transformation journey. And today I'm going to be talking about how technology can really bring people together and continue the collaboration and momentum at workplace. So starting with the very term COVID-19, something that we weren't expecting, something that a lot of us took lightly, and we felt that, it's not going to affect us, it's not going to come to us. We can tackle it, right? With COVID outbreak spreading across the world, the biggest question in the mind of most of us and most companies was that how do you move tens of thousands of employees to work remotely overnight? How do you really continue the momentum at work without really coming to office? How do you bring that sense of collaboration and community at workspace without really coming to office? And overnight, video conferencing had become a biggest part of our lives and work. Schools were really concerned about how to continue the momentum among kids and, continue the classes and learnings for our kids. We had our exams coming in together, and for us, the biggest question was, how do you make sure the business continuity remains? So schools were impacted, colleges are impacted, big startups, big companies, big giant enterprise to small startups, we all are in this together. But what really brought and what really has the capacity to bringing everyone together is technology. And technology plays an important and key role in bringing us together. There are different technologies that we can leverage. When I talk about technology and video conferencing specifically, the one that we're using right now, which is Zoom. We have different third-party tools in the market. There is Zoom, Slack, Skype that we've been using for ages now, and the one that I'm going to share specifically is Microsoft Teams. And I've been using Microsoft Teams for the longest time now, and I can really share my experience and how it's really helped me and my team to communicate and collaborate. And even in UK, we've rolled Teams for NHS, which is our health body in the United Kingdom, and in schools to help kids with continuing the learning without really going to school. And for people who don't know what Microsoft Team is a unified communication and a collaboration platform that combines persistent work chats, video meetings, file storage, and applications. And there are different reasons why I would always advocate Microsoft Team as a continuous momentum at work, but I will list down few reasons of why you should use Microsoft Teams to really accelerate the productivity working from home. And fun reason is that it's just more than a chat, right? At work, when you have conversations with your team members, and I can talk about myself, whenever we are in a brainstorming session inside a meeting room, I love drawing, I love visualizing and brainstorming on a blackboard and really pinning down everything that's in my mind to really brainstorm some of those ideas that come in your mind to tackle the situation you want to tackle. And what I really love about Microsoft Team is the whole sense of a collaborative platform, a platform where you can have conversations with your team members over a chat. You could really, on a click of a button, call the person. You can do a video conferencing. You could spin up on a click of a button a whiteboard where you could do your brainstorming session. And once your brainstorming session is done, you could always save that chart to be as a log down for future. And just attached in the chat, suppose you want to simply call or video call your colleagues to discuss a file straight out of a window, it's possible. So what really stands out in terms of Microsoft Team is the unified sense of collaboration, and a platform which really brings together different apps together. So if you want to talk to your customers, if you want to have a video conferencing with your customer, if you want to do your brainstorming sessions, it connects to your Outlook calendar, which means that if you have meetings after your conversation, it gives you an indicator of that. So I feel it's your virtual office space sitting from home, a virtual office space which connects you to your employees, to your team, to your customers with literally a click of button. And that really brings me to the whole point of it improving the collaboration and communication for you. Because I'll talk about it, and I've spoken to a lot of my customers and few of my customers who were not using Microsoft Teams before. Their main concern was we have employee base spreading across the world, right? We have teams sitting in United States to India, and we need to make sure that they communicate and they don't work in silos. So how do we tackle that aspect without really buying crazy number of licensing? Because money is an aspect as well. Our economy is going through a tough times. It's an unprecedented times that we weren't prepared for. And the biggest question for them was, how do we tackle this uncertainty without spinning up 50 things? And the answer was Microsoft Teams, because what Teams did for us was it helped us communicate, it helped us collaborate, it helped us work together and not in silos during these unprecedented situations, which is a tough time for all of us. And the third aspect why I would really say that Microsoft Teams has really helped in collaborating and bringing us together is a security platform, right? We're using Zoom right now, but there have been a major conversation around security. How secure are we? Like that is a question that always comes up in technology, right? A key question that always comes up is with technology is my data safe? Is the data that I'm putting it going to the safe person? How secure are we in terms of a platform? And all I can advocate as using Team for the longest time is that the privacy policies and safeguard policies under the hood at Microsoft Teams really ensures that Team is a safe platform for us in communication. It does keep in mind the regulation standards, and the regulatory standards are embodied in terms of the policies while building Teams. So I feel that you have access to your data key is with you, you are secured, and your conversation really belongs to you. And privacy is really important, and we embody that, and that is embodied in the tools that we make. And that's why I would always advocate Teams as a really secure platform for us to communicate. And the last point for me would be evolving always, right? I started using Teams as a way of communicating with my team, and my team is spread across 4 continents. So it is really hard to really communicate with everyone and to bring a sense of community when you have teams spread across different aspects and different parts of the world and different geographies and different time zones. It is difficult. It is very, very hard to bring that sense of community. But what I've noticed with Microsoft Teams is we're always evolving, we're always changing. The loop that we've always embodied, that we always listen to our customers, our feedback, and ensure those feedback as features in the conversations and in involving team as the product for you. And as a last statement, I would say that yes, it's difficult. It's time in our lives where we weren't prepared for. There were many customers and many clients I've spoken to who aren't the fact that there is an uncertainty of when is the lockdown going to get over, when can we step out, what does this really mean to us, has really got us to really embody one aspect that we all in this together. Right? We are all in this together, be it from different geographies sitting, we all are in this together. And what's really important for us is to have a business continuity plan at place so that we can continue the momentum at work, at schools, at hospitals, without that sense of uncertainty. And I feel technology has really loomed some of that uncertainty for us and really opened doors for us to continue work, to continue your business learning without really stopping. And for me, technology has been an important aspect to that continuity. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Malika, for sharing your experiences at how such a large company, sometimes we always take it for granted that, a large company like Microsoft or Intel would just figure it out. But you have rightly shared some of those intricate details in terms of how does, those challenges are also there for those big companies and how operationally you solve them using technology. So we're going to take up questions in the end. So keep sharing your questions during the chat window. And Malika, you can look at your questions also. And we're going to next have our speaker, Indu Bhargava. Indu, are you there on the call? Indu, are you there on the call?
Yes, very much. Hi, good evening, everyone.
So a quick introduction. I'm not going into detail of introduction because you all have the profile of the speakers with you. But as a quick introduction, Indu is somebody who is an expert at managing remote teams. She has done that in startups, in large companies alike. And she's an expert on how to engage employees, because you might have the best of those collaboration tools and technologies, but sometimes, you miss those water cooler chats, those cigarette breaks, those tea breaks, where you just chat up random things with your coworkers. And that's how that entire culture and organization is built. So how do you keep the morale of the employees? How do you keep them engaged, connected with each other, so they still feel that they are part of that organizational culture? So Indu is going to talk about some of those aspects. And I think she also has some slides. So I'll try to share them. Can everybody see
Thank you, Kartik. Very good evening to... Okay, everybody can hear me, right? Very good evening to all the people present here. Thank you, YLC. Thank you, AIMA, and thank you, Kartik, for organizing this. Thank you, Sushma and Malika, for very useful information in these difficult times. Uh, I've been handling teams remotely since 2010. Thankfully, that was not out of compulsion. It was out of a choice. I had come back from like living in UAE after 8 years, and I came back to India with a 3.5 years old child at home who would not settle. So I was looking for opportunity, where I could work from home and be there for the family. And I got this job where I could work from home, and it was a blessing in disguise. Uh, Not only then, even now it's proving to be a blessing in disguise. Ever since I've been, handling teams remotely. So we were working for a supplementary education service provider, and we were tutoring students in America. We were working on a US government project called NCLV. I'm sure most of you must be aware of it. So it was an after school program, and we were a team of 125 people and across India. And everybody used to work from home. And I'm talking about 2010. We didn't have so many tools at that time. So very few tools that we were using were Skype, VisIQ, and that's how we used to conduct our classes, and that's how we used to use make our calls just on Skype, video calls, and otherwise we had our cell phones and SMSs. So it was possible then also, and it's now though we have a whole lot of tools. Technology is it's like kind of uh, take a leap forward in eons. We have so many tools now that we can use. So when you are managing teams remotely, what are the few things that you need to keep in mind? It's a group of people who are working together who might not ever meet. And actually, that's true. I had never met the 125 people I was working with, and we were able to generate business of millions. Yes, that was possible. Kartik, can you move the slide, please? Yeah, so three very important aspects of the remotely handling teams is people, purpose, and process. So keep reiterating to your teams, what they have to do. Like, what's the purpose? What's the objective? What's the goal? And define roles for each and every one, and set the processes. Following a process is very, very important. So as a leader, as a team member, you should know what's your role should be defined, what are your responsibilities, where will you get the source from work from, and to whom you have to forward it. Everything should be clear. There has to be a clarity. And if processes are in place, then the things work. It's like a machine. Then you can work on autopilot. So we can use lots of tools. Malika has already mentioned few. I'm sorry, Malika, I forgot to add Microsoft Teams, but yes, I know my family uses it, and they're all praises. Kartik, can you move the slide, please? Yeah. So here are the few tools that I've been using. I've been dealing with teams in Australia, UK, Ireland, Philippines, and these are the tools that's been helping me, carry out my communication without any hitch or glitch. Yes, there have been issues that we'll be discussing in the later part, but then these are the tools that have been helping me to continue with my communication. Can we move ahead? Uh, all these things have already been mentioned by Malika. Google Drive, Dropbox, or OneDrive. I'm sure all of you are aware of it. So you can use this to share your big files. Challenges. I think this is what most of the you will be concerned about. What are the challenges that you might face when you are managing teams remotely? So one of the biggest challenge is communication. When you are together in a room, in an office, there's lots of communication happening formally, informally, through emails, through chats, through chit chats, like the Kartik mentioned, on the water coolers for your sutta breaks and whatever. But when you are working from the confinements of your homes, all that is missing. So you are so the environment is different. The communication can go in any direction. So communication is a big challenge. Um, Kartik, can you just move the slide a little up, please? There's nothing visible.
No,
Okay,
those slides are two slides are empty, Indu.
okay. Just give me a second. No problem. So basically, it's about the challenges and the barriers. You know, the barriers that you will face are the very first barrier could be technology barrier. So what is it? Don't assume, don't think that all your team members are aware of these technological tools. They understand the RAM and ROM of their devices. They understand the data plans being used at their homes. They know the challenges, and don't make fun of it. Understand their fears, their technology phobia, and accept that and try and train them and try and educate them and handhold them wherever it is necessary. Another barrier could be the social barrier. Like when we are working in the offices, we start depending on our colleagues, they become our friends. So when it is not there, that support system is not there, that cooperation is not there, you, you don't feel motivated to work. You miss that, and especially when you once you transit from the office environment to virtual environment. You've been working all along in the office, and then you've started working from home. It can be a very, very demotivating factor. So a social barrier could be a big challenge. Then emotional barrier. Um, Working from home can invoke different kind of emotions for different people. For me, working from home has always been my happy space, because I through this I can multitask. I can do lots of things. I can look after my family. I can take care of my professional responsibilities. I can run errands. I can do lots of things. But for this, for everyone, it's not like this. Some people, they need to get out. They have to have a that particular formal setting. Only then they can work, or they feel they get into that mode of working. So it can be challenging for people. But then you need to understand, as a leader, be in touch with your team members. Understand, if you're communicating with them regularly, you would know what's happening in their lives. If somebody is slipping into any fear zone, is anxious, is getting depressed, just help them, handhold them again, pull them out of it. You do whatever your bit that you can do. Then personal life and work life imbalances. Uh, because when we are going to office, we have schedules. We have to get them in the morning. We get up, we get ready, get up, and we go to office, then do our work, come back. So we leave our office life there, come back, get into that home life mold. But once we're working from home, that break is gone. So you don't know where the work life is ending and where that personal life is beginning. So the people, they can lose their priorities. They can just be confused what is happening, because some people can only work in routines. So if their routine is lost, so are they. They become unorganized. They don't like to get up. They don't like to take bath or get dressed up. So it can be devastating for some people, but this can be taken care of. And this can also result in lack of clarity, direction, and priorities. Here is a report. I mean, if you can see on the screen, there's a report. Okay, there's not a report. So I can share that with you later. So what can we do to overcome these challenges? What can be done to overcome these challenges? Well, you can move your water cooler online. Whatever discussions you've been having, you can have informal chit chat sessions and have those discussions there. Have your morning and evening tea coffee together virtually so that the team still feel connected. You can start and end discussions with your small talk, share your recipes, your funny moments, dress up, be presentable, and like inspire your teammates also. Just don't get up and sit in front of the computer. Get ready like you would go to get ready to go to office, and then only come and sit in front of your computer, so that you'll get that feel and you'll get into that mold of working. And many a times, when people are going through say their um, anxiety or depressive time. So what they need is just a sounding board. They don't always need an advice. Just be a sounding board for them. Hear them out. Even that is very comforting for people. All right, and I would suggest that instead of having very long 1 or 2 meetings every day, have couple of small meetings, like I would say minimum 3 to maximum 6 or 7 meetings in a day. Small meetings with different agendas so that the flavor is different and you would know what is happening actually in everybody's life when you are connecting so many times in the day. Uh, Most importantly, listen, believe, and accept if team members are facing challenges with respect to technology, resources, or time management. So, what you can do, offer them perks, get your sanctions, tell them whatever stationery you will buy or whatever is required to carry out the office work, that'll be reimbursed. Or say if you need to upgrade your internet connection, that you can send the bill to office. Offer these kind of perks so they don't feel it as a burden. Especially these are difficult times. We are in the saving mode. We are being cautious about everything. So if there's an extra expense, this can be a very daunting for the employee. So extend that kind of support to them. Have a buddy arrangement within the teams, because technology, yes, it has made our life simpler, easier, but then Google has crashed, Facebook has crashed, so anybody's system or internet can crash, but then work must go on. So have buddies in the team. If required, what's happening, with my buddy. But then make sure that people are not taking advantage of this buddy system. There are all sorts of people. A smart person can always just push the work towards the other people, giving some excuses. So you also have to be on top of everything. And last, have a reward, recognition, and if required, a penalty system in place to get your work accomplished and targets met. The penalty could be something funny, that if you're not able to finish your work, you'll take the entire team for lunch once the lockdown is over. Something of that sort, which is not pinching, but still it's a penalty. So that's it. I think that's all you can do, and just be in touch through various mediums. Use WhatsApp, use Zoom, use Microsoft Teams, do video calls, send emails. Just be in touch with your team. Uh, just listen to them, understand them, what's going on in their life, and as a team leader, as a team member, you'll have to don lots of hats during the day. Sometimes you'll have to be their mentor, sometimes you'll have to be their counselor, sometimes you'll have to be their say guide, sometimes you'll have to be the boss, and sometimes you'll have to be the friend. So it's like when you're managing teams remotely, it's also like parenting. You're also learning, and as and when the situations arise. And with this, I would like to end my talk. Thank you very, very much for giving me a patient hearing. Thank you, Kartik. Over to you.
Thanks, Indu. And I think you have lent a certain degree of calm to the entire conversation, and everybody has got a lot of ideas in terms of how they can manage. And a very interesting analogy of how it is similar to parenting and how you need to wear multiple, hats as a team leader or a team manager. Thank you so much, Indu. And now we're gonna go on to our last speaker of the day, Anisha. Anisha is an expert. She's based out of the UK, and she's an expert in how do we communicate across different business cultures and geographies. So she's going to talk about Anisha. You are there, right?
Yes, I'm here, Kartik.
Yeah.
Hi.
So Anisha is gonna So Anisha is gonna talk about. So the whole agenda of this discussion was growth, right? So we've talked about management more or less in the entire session. But Anisha is going to talk about that when we talk about growth, when we talk about customer acquisition across the globe. Like in my business, for example, I have to talk to customers in different geographies. In the good old days, I would go fly over there, meet them in person, wine and dine, talk in meetings, have informal conversation with them and build a rapport or a trust relationship with them. But now I don't have a luxury of that sort of relationship building opportunity or a rapport building opportunity, right? And virtually you can do as much as possible, right? But how do you still be cognizant of differences in culture when you're dealing with people from UK, for example, or Australia or whatnot? How do you still ensure that empathy, understanding of their context, what's happening in their geography, and still be able to build that relationship, which is so very, very important when you are trying to grow your business? So Anisha is going to talk about those softer aspects, that how do you build that, build those relationships in your business when the modus operandi is going to be only virtual. Over to you, Anisha.
Great, thank you. Thanks a lot. So good afternoon. I think it's nearly evening for a lot of people who are on the call today. I'm talking to you from London, and it's a beautiful spring day. I'm looking in this direction because it's sunny outside, but like Malika was saying earlier, in extraordinary times. Quickly, thanks to the other speakers. I found what I've heard already today really interesting, and I've certainly learnt things. And what we're all saying is that the dynamics of doing business has changed. What we expected might happen over a few decades has happened in the space of a few weeks. And how do we get work done in this new world? How are we effective, to Kartik's point earlier? How are we productive? How do we contribute and ensure that we meet our performance targets or business ambitions? So I was fascinated when Kartik first spoke to me about the session today, and I hope I can shed some light on the kind of work that I'm involved in, and that you walk away from today's session feeling like you've learned something. And we've learned about the sort of the people element, the HR element, working well together, continuing good business, the legal part and the tech side. To Kartik's point, I'm going to talk a little bit through a little bit of theory and a little bit of practice and an example of working at an international level. And I'm going to start off with a little story which Kartik is familiar with. So something happened to me this week where somebody I was supposed to have a call with was half an hour late. Then when they came on the call, they explained to me that they were half an hour late because the person on the previous call wouldn't stop talking, and this person happened to be a senior person. Now, for me, immediately, I understand that there's a sense of timing when I deal with people from India, and that this person is from a polychromic culture where time is fluid. Now, it isn't a big deal for me, and it wasn't a problem for me earlier in the week because I didn't have anything scheduled for that time. But I know that it would bother a German colleague, for example. When I tell my German friend to come for dinner at 7, he arrives at 7 sharp, not 5 to or 5 past. What it made me think about was the element of the intercultural competency and the value piece, which is time is fluid, but also clearly the person who was speaking on the last call was someone who was senior, who had some sort of power. which means that that person couldn't have been asked to stop talking, which made me think about power distance. So already I've talked about two concepts, power distance and sense of timing, which I'll come back to later because there's a little bit of theory. But these are the kind of interactions with people from different cultures that are happening to all of us on a regular basis. And as I say, I will cover that shortly. So Kartik, if you could show my slides, that would be great. I don't know if you're able to do that.
Yes.
Wonderful. Okay, lovely. The objectives of today's session really is to start getting you thinking about the concepts involved in intercultural communication, to consider the influences of communication preferences on behavior, and then think about your own leadership style, the needs of the person that you're interacting with, and the context. And hopefully that's going to start thinking you about developing skills in this virtual global world, which some of us are already used to, but it is so new that I think we can all sort of get the help that we need. I'm going to take a step back and just start with the basics, so we're all singing from the same hymn sheet, as it were. What is culture? Let's get some clarity here. I have some theoretical expressions of culture here, which is around systems of shared meaning and collective programming of the mind. These are from, the collective programming of the mind. For many of you who are familiar with Hofstede's work, Hofstede is considered to be the leader of modern intercultural communication, or the father of modern intercultural communication. There's also Helen Spencer-Oti, who incidentally I work with at Warwick University, who has also done a lot of work around interculture. And Helen often talks about a fuzzy set of basic assumptions. So culture is nebulous in terms of how we explain culture. And the reason I'm showing you these three different sort of explainers of what culture is to say that we don't always have a handle even on what culture is. But what we do know, that culture isn't just about nation states, yes? It could be about generations. It could be communicating across different generations, gender, profession. Some of the things that I'm often involved in is helping companies communicate, between marketing people and tech people, for example, who are different tribes and work differently. So that's a little bit about culture. Kartik, if I can have the next slide, please. In terms of defining what intercultural communication is, so you've got the starting point of what culture is, and then there's this piece around, well, what is intercultural communication? Yes? And perspectives is the thing that I'm actually interested in. So if we look at culture and the way that culture is looked at, often people refer to culture as an iceberg. And this is a metaphorical model of culture that was popularized in the 1950s by an anthropologist called Edward T. Hall. And it draws a distinction between visible and hidden, visible and invisible culture, yes? And there are various things going on. So there's a visible piece of culture, which could be around your traditions. It could be about holidays. It could be about food. But then there's invisible culture, which is linked to value. Now, remember that there are three levels of uniqueness in human mental programming. So there's your personality, which is unique to you, which is inherited and learned. Your culture, which is specific to categorized groups and learned. And then there's human nature, which is universal and inherited. So, for example, for me, I get what I hope is my sense of compassion from my mother, but my drive from my father. So these are none of this is cast in stone, but looking at culture as this iceberg is a very interesting and useful model. What it also lends very well to is this concept of 3 Ps that describe the way we look at culture, which is around products and practices and then perspectives. Yes. So products and practices are explicit. Kartik and I have often talked about a very famous book called Kiss, Bow, Shake Hands. It's a famous book. And it allows you to learn tactics very quickly about when you do business with people internationally or market or any element of organization. It's all about tactics. So, do you kiss? Do you bow? Do you shake hands? Is it 2 kisses? Is it 3 kisses? 4 kisses? It's very confusing. It could be, how do you hold your wine glass? I mean, it's a personal bugbear of me that I often see people holding their wine glass very sort of in the wrong way. Okay. So those are the products and the practices, but perspectives is the piece that really is interesting for those of us who work internationally. And the perspectives are the things that are implicit. And it's the piece that I'm really, really interested in. Now, on the next slide, Kartik, what I've done, if we can, brilliant, is I've given you some examples of cultural values dimensions, and these are the perspectives, the implicit perspectives that I talk about, which are driven by key values dimensions. So there are things like power distance, yes? So for example, it's the extent to which a society accepts the fact that power in institutions and organizations are distributed equally or unequally, yes? So whether you have a rigid form of hierarchy or something that's a little bit more, shall I say, egalitarian. For example, in a lot of the research that's done nationally across countries, India figures very highly with power distance as a hierarchical organization. And it would do, because we give a lot of respect to older people, or we give respect to seniority, for example. Countries displaying lower power distance will be more egalitarian and would question absolute power structures. So, for example, a lot of Scandinavian countries are like that. There are also things, for example, which I picked out already, about your sense of time. So things like whether you adhere to sequential or synchronic or monochronastic timing. So Indians tend to be in the latter camp, yes? We often talk about Indian timing. Kartik he refers to it a few times. Time is viewed as fluid. But in a religious sort of perspective of tradition of rebirth, time is endless. So we talk about this Indian timing. Whereas in monochronastic cultures, time is linear, it's manageable. We use expressions like time is money or wasting time. So those are just two elements of these values dimensions. Unfortunately, I've only got 15 minutes to talk to you today, and this requires months, weeks of a lot of theory and a lot of getting into, which I'm sure separately I'm more than happy to dive deeper into or lecture further on. I've just picked out a few examples, and I imagine that any of you who have any interest in cross-cultural or intercultural communication will be familiar with many of these terms, and there's a lot that you can look at online to discover more about these values dimensions. The last one that I also wanted to point out was something around language use as well. That is based around dimensions and that. So it's about who talks and how long, who takes turns to talk, where your preferred degree of familiarity might be. So there are lots and lots of interesting things going on. And there are also dimensions for organizational culture as well. So a lot of these can be applied to organizational culture, but actually there are separate things. You know, for example, as an organization, are you process oriented or results oriented? Are you pragmatic? Are you normative? Is there a lot of control, or is it a little bit looser? So there's quite a lot going on. For those of you who might be interested, I've also already referred to the internet. There are various things. A key thing that I use along with my colleagues, we use something called the GLOBE study, which is the Global Leadership and Organizational Behavior Effectiveness study, which was done, I think it might have been started in the 90s, and it went through to the noughties, and it was done by Wharton School at the University of Pennsylvania in the US. And they got data from thousands of middle managers, and they came up with all of these dimensions of leadership and cultural competencies. So if you're interested, you can go off and have a look at the GLOBE study and maybe try and map out India, for example, as opposed to another country like Canada or Australia, who you might be doing business with. The other one that I might flag as well is the Hofstede Institute, which is available online, and they have lots of different tools that you can use to learn about different cultural dimensions. What I will say here with all of this is that we're talking in generalizations. Nobody yet has done any kind of empirical study where they interview or survey every human being, yes? We always consider communication preferences sort of, in generalizations. We think about them across generations, function, gender, etc. We don't want to put people in a box. We don't want to apply blanket cultural rules. even research is full of issues. Hofstadter gets criticized, frequently. We don't all think and behave the same. So, for example, we cannot say that every Indian is like this. Every Indian is always late. We can't say every Australian or English person is always like this. Yes. I did quite a lot of research in India some years ago. And what was interesting for me is in the research that I did in particular organizations, there was less power distance, particularly from the younger people, yes, who actually wanted and exercise more of an equal and a flatter way of communicating. So I thought that was really interesting, but then there are things that happen, and these things happen all the time, So Kartik and I were talking about something that he had experienced where a leader had asked someone to make themselves visible on a video call. Now, in the culture that I occupy, which is a bit more egalitarian, I wouldn't ever expect a leader to make anyone do anything, yes? In companies that I've worked in, you would normally respect someone's wishes to conduct themselves in a way that works best for them, whether they wanted to be visible on a video or not. Yeah. So there's a lot going on, and I'm talking very quickly because I'm conscious of time. In terms of what's happening right now, I thought what would be useful is to talk through some tools or skills that you can utilize, something practical that you might be able to take away. And again, as a step back, for me, what's occupying my thoughts and my days and my nights at the moment is that the world that I largely occupy in this corona world, the crisis landscape, we're looking at it in 3 phases. We're looking at immediate, ongoing, and then post-pandemic. A lot of people are in immediate, but we also understand that internationally people are at different phases, yes? So all of us doing business internationally, we need to be aware of what's going on, yes? So Japan only came into lockdown this past week. They're going to be in immediate communication, whereas in the UK, we're thinking about ongoing. And then there's a post-pandemic world, and goodness knows what's going to happen and how long that's going to take. So I thought it would be good to point out this landscape. And then in terms of what's going on, this landscape means that we're in the virtual world, and we're going to be in the virtual world for a long, long time coming. So there are the basics of good virtual connections to consider. And I know that both Malika and Indu have talked about this already. There's the normal stuff that's going on, the timing. These are basics, and I'm sorry if I'm talking about things that perhaps you're already aware of, but it never fails to surprise me how many people get this incorrect from time to time, or even frequently. So does the timing work for everyone? Yesterday, I had to go on a call at 7 o'clock in the evening, which someone from the US had set up, which is not onerous, but actually it felt like this was going on into the evening, and, I wanted to be with the rest of my household. So think about the timing. It's such a basic, yes? If you're based in India, think about the timing elsewhere. There's a length of meeting time as well. This is a basic. Think about attention spans. There are also the elements of successful meetings. So establishing objectives of the meeting, what you want to get out of it. What's the protocol? Who's presenting? Who's asking questions? Who's facilitating? So they're all the basics, okay? Then there's what I consider to be a critical element, which is context. So I just talked about the 3 landscapes that we are looking at and we're working through, certainly from where I'm sitting. But I cannot stress enough how important it is to understand what's going on in the countries of the people that you're dealing with. So we, at the moment in the UK, and I think for a lot of European countries, we are very, very aware that business is slower. A lot of organizations are thinking about the well-being of staff. A lot of countries are in different parts of the journey, as I've already explained. I've heard from companies in the UK where they told employees that they have a license to be slow. Okay, there are big things happening. So if you are coming from outside of the UK and trying to do business, to talk to clients or colleagues, you can't push. People are dealing with all sorts of different things at the moment. Context is also bigger. And again, this is for normal times as well. If you are dealing with people outside of your country, it is so important to really, really get what's going on. Earlier this week, there was a mood in this country on Monday because the Queen had done a speech. And then on Tuesday, that mood changed again because our Prime Minister went into hospital. Yes? all of those little things help you to gauge where people might be. I mean, and again, basics. I don't know how many of you know, but today's a holiday in the UK. Yes, it's Good Friday. It's the Friday before Sunday. But funnily enough, in Italy, which is a Catholic country, it's not a holiday today. So these are some of the basics that you should perhaps be aware of. And then thirdly, there's this piece around intercultural communication, which can be applied to different elements of your interaction. You know, we've already talked about deal breakers like lateness, but think about the language that you want to use, whether it's familiar or formal. Think about speaking slowly, which I'm not speaking slowly at all because of time. Think about turn taking, stop, listen, and then think about whether someone else wants to talk. This is very difficult for me because I come from a boisterous family where no one listens, but you have to learn these things. Allowing people to absorb what's happening, yes. When you brainstorm ideas in a virtual world and you're making decisions, yes, and addressing conflict, are you doing it in a way that's comfortable for everyone? You know, collaboration means different things to different people. You know, if you're talking to people from a reticent culture, then I would suggest that you go around the room and ask everyone to participate with views. I mean, not if you've got, as we do, hundreds of people, or certainly not even 27 people as someone tried to do, because we don't have time for that, yes? But think about what's happening in that virtual room, yes? Some people can't and won't disagree. Allow them an opportunity, say by email, to state that difference, yes? When I work with French and Italian people in general, there's often disagreement. That's just part of the discussion, yes? But there are other clients and colleagues where I think actually I need to allow them other venues and other tools in which they're encouraged to interact with me in different ways, yes? The other thing, particularly in terms of the relationship building, which Kartik is particularly interested in, is understand the culture of that person and think about social chats that are scheduled. You might not be able to have beer with them or go for dinner, but understand that it might take longer than usual to have those social chats, to take things offline. You know, understand that if they have a certain cultural perspective that is either low or high context, do they need lots of information or do they need the bigger picture? You know, Kartik and I have been talking about the guy in Australia who likes to have beer as part of doing business. So where's he coming from? Yes, he wants to do business with an equal. He wants the interaction between the two of you. So you make the decision about selling or buying. You don't need to defer to anyone else. Yes, this is a high masculine culture and high individuality. Yes, which we see from research. So appeal to his self-interest. There is so much that I can talk about, and I'm woefully over time, so I apologize for that.
No worries. So what we're going to do quickly is we're going to get into Q&A, and I would request all the speakers, and I hope we still have them, Sushma, Anisha, Malika, and Indu, based on whichever is in your kitty, just request you to own it up and answer. So for the first question,
maybe Kartik, I can start with... Yes, I can hear you, Kartik. Can you hear me?
Yeah. So the first question is: if force majeure clause is there in the agreement, can landlord deny for rental waiver?
So, most of the questions, Kartik and whosoever has raised the questions, are actually factual. So a lot of it depends on the language which has been used in the agreement. A lot of it. For example, as I quoted, example of Reliance. Reliance is also contending that no, due to force majeure, it is not supposed to pay rent. However, the opposite party, the lawyer, is saying no, as such, there is no clause in the force majeure clause. There is no language which excuses Reliance, from making the payment. So so for this purpose, I have also just quickly pulled out a clause which I had drafted for my client. So it says that, after drafting the entire force majeure clause, we have specifically included the language that it is hereby clarified that the lessee, means the tenant, shall not be obligated to pay the rent or any other charges payable under the agreement to the landlord from the date the tenant is unable to use or occupy or carry out its operation from the demised premises until the same are rendered fit for the tenant's use, occupation and operations. So, this is just one example. So it all depends upon the language.
Okay.
So if
Sure. So, and do you want to talk quickly about furloughing? What is the scope and legality about it? Where people go for temporary leave of absence? How
So
can employees?
furlough, yes, sure. Sure. So the furlough as such is not a legal concept per se. These are the concepts which are used outside India. So it is used normally in the context of the prisoners, etc., that they are given leaves. So basically, in context of employees, it means that leave of absence is granted, temporary leave of absence granting
And no pay
of
is given
so
at
under
that time.
yeah, temporary leave of absence is given. So which is in legal terms in India, it is captured under Industrial Dispute Act, which is laying off. So for which
Okay.
there are provisions that so for which the relevant provisions are that in case the employer lays off its employees, then it has to pay compensation, of course, and there are various conditions attached to it which has to be fulfilled.
Sure. And this is very important point. In many small companies, I know among my friends as well, where sometimes people don't even have formal employee contracts in place and they're just having people on their payroll. What would people like them do? Both employees and employers.
So in that case, again, Kartik will have to bifurcate, employees if they are falling in the definition of workmen as defined under Industrial Dispute Act. Then the laying off termination will be governed by that provision. However, if they are not workmen, normal, white collar employees who do not meet the requirement there, then of course it has to be amicably settled because there is nothing in writing in between.
Okay. And you're also going to share those some slides and some inputs for members here also, right? Where they can see some of those inputs which you're given today. Okay. So next question is around Skype. I think Malika, maybe you want to take it up. That is Skype part of MS Teams? Can people use Skype integrated into these Teams platform, and why Teams is not picked up? That may be a business question, but generally about Skype and MS Teams, people want to know a little bit about.
Perfect. So yes, Skype and Microsoft Teams fall under Microsoft products that we have as in terms of offerings in virtual communication. But I think your question is why Skype is not pushed over Microsoft Teams, and why is Microsoft Teams focused more? So I think that is a strategic decision taken by Microsoft, and not something I can comment on. But what I can highlight here is that Microsoft Team is also an offering by Microsoft as part of MS 365, which has a lot of other things in totality with it, which includes the Microsoft Word, the Microsoft Excel, and different offerings by Microsoft as a license. And that is why a lot of our customers are more inclined towards Microsoft Team, because it falls under the Microsoft 365 license here. Yes.
Okay. And next question is, from a compliance perspective, what is the legal framework an organization has to ensure if they want to operate their workforce in work from home mode? I don't know, Sushma, do you want to touch upon it? That there is no legality around work from home mode. What are the obligations? What are the liabilities on the employer side if everybody is working in a work from home environment?
So in this case, Kartik, if you're working from home, then home, apparently becomes a commercial establishment. So if you are operating anywhere, if you have a commercial establishment, then under the respective state laws, you have to procure a license. For example, in Delhi, Haryana, you have to seek license under Shops and Establishment Act, which is applicable to Delhi or Haryana. Similarly, if you are working from home and your home is in Karnataka, then again you'll have to seek permission and registration and license from the Karnataka Shops and Establishment Act. So that is the major statute which will be applicable.
Okay. The next question is there any research or some data that productivity is higher or lower when you're working from home versus traditional office? I don't know. Indu, do you want to take it up? Is there any research or some data around it that if the productivity vis-a-vis?
Yeah, I'll just take this up. There is no data as such, but yes, there have been some studies conducted in US and Western cultures where the work from home is very, very normal and apparent. So I have one such report that's there in my PPT. I'll share it with you.
Okay, perfect. And do you also feel that work from home culture will be continued by these companies just because of the cost benefits, because they save on office rent and transportation cost? Maybe they can say reduce your salary and you work from home. Do you think these kind of HR strategies being adopted by companies?
I think this won't be a valid reason, like, that to continue work from home. But yes, this is going to be the way forward. Uh, I talk to lots of people, my neighbors, my friends, my colleagues, teammates. They are kind of finding it very comfortable. And they are liking it. They've got lots of flexibility, lots of free time in their hands, and the productivity is not going down, rather it's going up. So I think this is the way forward. This is how it's going to be.
Okay, and the next question is, do you think there is any issues around data confidentiality? Because when people are working from home, they might be using common devices with their other family members. They are using unsecure networks sometimes. So I don't know, Malika, do you want to pick it up? That how do people handle data security aspects while they're working from home?
No, absolutely. I think before I answer this question, you mentioned about productivity and our company is going to continue working from home. I think there's another aspect to the whole productivity aspect here when you're working from home, which is that it reduces the amount of time you take in traveling, right? And what it also adds is the pollution. So it is best in our interest to be working from home. And I completely disagree to the aspect of company offering that if you work from home, we will sort of like, if you work from home, we'll reduce your cost. I think that's bizarre, because at the end of the day, the key focus for every company should be that the work is done. Let's line the straight fact. The work needs to be done, and the work needs to be at the perfect charm of it. And if that is delivered by the employee, if the customer is sitting, if your employee is sitting wherever the employee is sitting, that should not be a concern for a company. And I would definitely advocate that. Now, in regards to data privacy while working from home, I know there have been a lot of concerns and issues specifically with Zoom. It's a shame you're using it. But it really depends on what tool you are using while you are communicating at work. I think that's really important. All I can talk about is the platform that we advocate at Microsoft, which is Microsoft Teams and Skype, and the data privacy and the data policies as per the regulatory standards are enshrined in these platforms as an offering, and security is key for us. And yes, but it highly depends on the tool that you're using. It highly depends upon the platform that you're using. And I would also advocate that when you're using or implementing any virtual communication platform in your company for your employees, please go and read the privacy policies for that specific tool. It's really important, because if those privacy policies are in align to what you advocate in your company, you should be fine.
Okay. And quick one for you, Indu. What kind of activities can people do to virtually engage employees, and how to mirror some of those interactions which you were saying?
I'm sure you are familiar with the concept of watch party that's happening over the FB. So something of that sort you can do with your teammates. You can have virtual parties. You can have your drinks and snacks at your places and just be with your colleagues, be online on Microsoft Teams or Zoom, whatever. I mean, this is how you can engage with them. Of course, the usual, work meetings, yes, that goes on. But other than that, this is what you can do with your colleagues and friends.
And
Kartik, sorry, can I step in there? I'd like to add to what Indu is talking about, particularly since a lot of what I do steps into engagement. So a lot of what we're seeing, there's a social element of engagement with employees. So absolutely, there's that virtual piece of, having social rooms. Yes. So people can go in and do events that lightens the load in a terrible time of crisis. I see companies that are scheduling in social chats. So what you've been talking about before, if you don't go out to have a coffee, what's going on? So companies are actively scheduling in 2 or 3 chats a day where you go in and just have a natter. And then there's another interesting thing that I've seen an American company do where they're having a phone chain. And this is all part of engagement, which is it's not quite a buddy system. One person has another person that they check in with on the phone every day. All of this adds to engagement. But from a corporate point of view, I'd just like to stress that there are things that are going on that are really, really important. So for any organization, and this is about engagement, you've got to have one source of the truth, yes? So you've got to have one place, one portal, one intranet, or one person who knows or who has that validity and who's facilitating that one source of truth, what's going on, yes? If you've got too many people and too many resources and too many tools saying all sorts of things, that's too complicated, whoever you're communicating with. There's something about leadership as well, and we haven't really talked about it much here, but there's a real need right now for lighthouse leadership, yes? So leaders have got to pull their weight, and leaders have got to stand at the front and talk about what they know, yes? Be authentic, but actually lead right from the front there, because everyone's going to follow that ship that they're sailing. And then the other one is really, and I can't stress this enough, find out what people want. So all the people who are doing good from a communication point of view are doing pulse surveys, checking in with employees, checking in with clients, checking in with customers. What do you want from us? Yeah, keep learning. Some people are pulsing employees every few days, yes, just to find out what's going on. So I just wanted to add that from an engagement point of view, yes, there's that personal and there's a social element of it, but we really mustn't forget, that we all operate in business environments. So what's going to move our business forward as well? Okay,
great. The next one is, what's the effect of COVID on the IT sector in India? Malika, do you want to take a shot at how the entire, since you are also in the IT products and services business, how is it at large impacted? Do you see job cuts happening? Do you see clients pushing out that IT is a sort of a discretionable budget and they're cutting down on budgets? Do you see these trends?
In fact, I see quite the opposite of the job cuts, specifically in technology. I think one thing that we've seen in the last 3 weeks is the technology stocks going up. That makes me really happy. I'm sorry, I'm just being really greedy with my stocks going up. But I think let's put it all together, right? When you're working from home, you're going to be relying more on technology. You're going to be using more technology tools to communicate and work. What that has led to is more technology usage, and companies, specifically cloud providers like Amazon, Microsoft, Google, they have been booming really well. Like I can mention Microsoft team, and I can reveal this stat because it's in public domain now, has grown to 775% in the last 3 weeks. So people are highly relying on technology because that is the need of the hour. That is what's getting people to communicate together and get that sense of community, which is lacking during these unprecedented times. But question around, have you seen job cuts in the Indian market? I haven't, because I'm not very close to the Indian market. What I have seen is with my friends who are investors in small tech companies and small startups in UK, yes, startups in general have had the biggest hit, and specifically this really brings to the fact that we didn't have a business continuity plan at place to have, to tackle to these unprecedented time. I was seeing this interview with the NASDAQ CEO last night, and she mentioned 9/11 was such a stepping stone for them to really bring the business continuity plan in place for their company to continue the momentum at work, that now they can practice it during this crisis. So the key for all companies is to have a business continuity plan. Have I seen IT job cuts in India? I'm not well versed with that market. Have I seen it in UK? Yes, but with small tech companies. To be honest, we've all seen a hit. not just small companies, biggest retail companies and biggest tech companies as well. But in terms of cloud providers, I've seen the usage of cloud has gone up to an enormous rate, and that's led to a boom for cloud companies and cloud providers. And yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to take the last question because we're really short of time, and I would request Anisha to address it. The question is very interesting. It says that, do we see the age-old cultural practices of, handshaking, turning into private space, people standing at a distance in flights, in public places? Do you see that changing at large from a behavioral perspective? Do you think any future meeting will not be the same again?
I think the short answer is yes. And I saw that question, and I'm already reading a lot academically. That's even in the past couple of weeks, the academics are getting very, very busy thinking about what the change is. Let's also remember that culture is fluid. Earlier, I mentioned that nothing is ever cast in stone. There are things that happen in our lives. I mean, I don't want to get too controversial, but even, for example, religious practices that are born out of culture that have happened for so many years. You know, it's Easter weekend here. Why do we eat cross buns? I don't know. Yes. So culture is fluid. Culture moves all the time. Are we going to stop shaking hands and showing our elbows? I don't know. But this whole pandemic is going to change the way we live. You know, what did I read this morning? We're going to stop using paper money. China's already doing that. You know, particularly in the Northern Hemisphere, more people than ever before will work from home. That's a given. It's going to change the landscape of offices. Last week, somebody had said that actually from a real estate point of view, we now need to start thinking about all the empty offices that will now remain empty forever. So how do we make use of that space? Do they become public spaces? And then the way we work in itself, what we expect from each other, what we expect from our leaders, also why we go into the office, that's going to change as well. And then there's all the personal stuff, you know, in terms of how we interact. So yeah, short answer, culture will change. How much of it, we don't know, but the way we live is definitely going to change.
Okay, that brings me to the end of the session because we're really short of time now. Thank you so much, our esteemed speakers, Malika, Anisha, Indu, and Sushma. Can't thank you enough, and I am sure our audience really enjoy it, and we could take as many questions as we could, but nevertheless we would be doing more such sessions, and whatever is permitted by the speakers, I'll share that content with all of you through Rajni. Thanks Rajni, thanks Sanjay from AIMA for supporting this session, and we look forward to doing it more. And as far as the cultural change is happening, I think Namaste would become more and more popular. So thank you so much everyone.